Yeah.
And there we go now. And okay, we're starting it now. So we'll just wait while people log in. If you're here for my conversation with Tarek Loubani, or you're here to ask Dr. Loubani questions, you're at the right spot. I'm Peter Larson. I'm the chair of the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine. Um, and we will just wait for one more minute, 1.5 minutes. I see we're up to 75 attendees. I think there's some up to 85. I think there's some more coming in. So let me just, while people are coming in, let me just establish a couple of basic rules. First of all, I want to remind everybody that I am doing this from Ottawa, which is unceded Algonquin territory. And it's also been drawn to my attention that today is the National Day of Remembrance for Violence Against Women. And I think both those things are particularly relevant to our topic tonight because, of course, the unceded Algonquin territory relates to Canada's past as a settler colonial power, taking over lands that were Indigenous lands. And that is a mirror of what's happening in Israel-Palestine today, and particularly in Gaza. And the National Day of Remembrance of Violence Against Women is also particularly relevant because of the terrible things that are going on in Gaza today. Particularly, many have noted the number of women and children who've been killed by this murderous bombing campaign that's taking on. So welcome to you all. I have with me Tarek Loubani. Dr. Tarek Loubani is a Canadian Palestinian who's worked a lot in Gaza, but rather than me trying to introduce Tarek, I'll just ask you, Tarek, to just introduce yourself. I hope that there's many people on the call will know Tarek already and will have heard of him, but hopefully there's some who haven't. And so Tarek, please take a few minutes to just introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for this. And thank you to everybody at OFIP for all of your hard work doing these events. I appreciate it. Of course, to all the people who are giving up their evening to join us to talk and to learn more about this. Thank you to you too. As Peter said, I've worked in the Gaza Strip. I'm a Palestinian refugee living in Canada and came here as a child. I really felt such a deep sense of needing to give back to not just Palestine, but people everywhere. So I started working first in Latin America and then around the world as well in initially the West Bank and then the Gaza Strip, where I've been practicing medicine, teaching medicine, participating in capacity building that the Palestinians have been doing with their medical system. I'm an emergency physician, so that's my day job. I work in London, Ontario, but also work in a good amount in Northern Ontario at this point, and also other parts of the world.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So rather than just start into questions, someone sent me in a little video that I'd like to share. It's a 3-minute video. I'd just like to share with the audience, and then I'll get into my discussions with Tarek. So if I can do this properly, do the share screen, and I go here, share sound, share. Here we go. Give me a heads up if you're not hearing it. Grafton, if you wouldn't mind, Grafton Rossa in the background handling questions.
Yes, I can hear it.
We're all Palestinian.
I apologize to everybody. My attempt at trying to add a little spice this evening didn't work out very well. It was obviously beyond my pay grade. So I'll send a link to the video afterwards so anybody who attends.
Or you can paste it now as well, Peter, if you have it.
I'm not
actually. I think I have it. So while you're talking, I'll
you can paste it in the chat. Okay.
Yeah, if people are interested in watching it later.
Tarek, you should run this. Just interview me, except I don't have very much to say. Anyway, all right. Hello from frigid Montreal. Thank you so much. So, so what I do want to comment, the chat is open to everybody. So anybody who wants to use the chat can do so. You can chat with each other, or you can chat with us. But we are only going to deal with questions that come in the Q&A. I don't really have the capacity to keep an eye on the chat as it's going on. So the chat is for you to share ideas or make comments and so on. Tarek may see something on the chat if he can multitask. I only can do one thing at a time, which is to try to run this and have some conversation. So please put your questions in the Q&A. My colleague, Grafton Ross, who is the vice chair of the Ottawa Forum of Palestine, and he is also our head of research. He will pick up your questions that are in the Q&A. He will kind of bundle them together, so he won't necessarily repeat your question. If there are several questions that cover the same topic, they will do so. All right. So, Tarek, thank you very much again. You've introduced yourself. Tarek, just help us know, just in terms of context, how many times have you been to Gaza, and for how long? What's the nature of your experience in Gaza? Over what period of time did it occur?
At this point, I think it's beyond counting. Basically, I started to go to Gaza in mid 2011, shortly after I became a doctor and after I had, felt relatively established in my work in Latin America at the time in Colombia. And since then, initially I went in through Egypt because that was the only possible path for me, and then started going in through Israel. It has to be, many dozens of times that I've gone in. Usually I work in London and then I go a few times a year.
In London, Ontario.
In London, Ontario, yeah. And then go a few times a year. And sometimes it ends up that I go in between those trips that I have regularly planned because something is happening. Sometimes I don't make it because the Israelis deport me. Since 2014, I think the Israelis have jailed me 3 times so far. Obviously, the Egyptians jailed me a couple of times as well, 3 times as well. Since then, one
Sorry, I can't help it. I can't help laugh to how casually you talk about being thrown into jail by the Egyptians and the Israelis.
Anyway. Sometimes you go to jail, Peter. It's if you haven't, have you really lived? I think my father tore his hair out when I said something like that. Anyhow, so it's hard to get in. It's very, very hard to get in. When I first started going in, it was incredibly difficult, very difficult circumstances and situation through Egypt. And that gradually got easier and better as things improved, as we moved into sort of the Morsi government, who made it easier. And then, of course, when the next government came in
Egypt,
of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt, then again it became impossible. And from 2013 to 2018, it was like truly hermetically sealed. It was very, very difficult for anybody to get in, get out. And then as a result of the Great March of Return, there was some easing that allowed people to travel in and out of Gaza through Egypt. The Israelis have always been very difficult to sort of travel through. And like when I said that I've been jailed a few times with the Israelis, I've also been just denied. I get in, everything is fine. I get to the border and they just say no. Or they've tampered with my trips. For example, I get dates for my trips and then they can just say, we've changed your entry date. We've changed your exit date. And I mean, I have a job, I have a life, I have things that I'm supposed to be doing. It's very difficult to adapt. And of course, everyone in my life understands the importance of this. And so they're very forgiving, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it is very taxing on them and on me. So I think that is a microcosm of the blockade. My personal experience is a small, almost meaningless example of what's happening to Palestinians. Palestinians and their families are regularly denied entry for medical treatment, are denied entry to Israel and to Egypt for any manner of anything, and sometimes just as a tool for applying pressure on their family members who might be suspected of some crime, like writing a poem or drawing a photo or drawing a picture, taking a photo. So really, it's the way that Gaza has been run for now about 15, 16 years, where truly nobody has been able to get in and get out with a tremendous amount of difficulty.
I know my two experiences in going to Gaza have both been quite disagreeable at the areas crossing. I remember coming out and my suitcase had been opened up and all my things were on the conveyor belt. Everything I had was opened up. It was really intended to make it disagreeable, make it a very a kind of experience where you don't want to do that again. And I'm not Palestinian. I'm a white Canadian, and clearly the Israelis don't want journalists. They don't want foreigners to go in and see, and they make things difficult for that to happen. So you really, I admire you because you have to steel yourself. I'm sure every time you go, you have to steel. You know you're going to have a disagreeable experience going in, and you're going to have a disagreeable experience coming out, and that takes a lot of intestinal fortitude. So,
Yeah,
Tarek,
I mean,
you know,
I just want to say a quick comment about that, Peter. The difference really between you and me and most Palestinians is that we know that at the end of the day we'll make it through, and if we don't, there'll be hell to pay. So if I don't make it in to Gaza, like whatever, a few days in Tel Aviv, I get to decide, am I going to go back home to Canada? Am I going to stay? Am I going to, like, what am I going to do? For Palestinians, though, that situation is catastrophic. People who go out for medical treatment or who are denied day after day or who are told, bring your brother or else you can't go. I mean, this is, you're right, you have to steel yourself. And of course, the personal experience is terrible. Like, I've never had so many people touch me against my will in so many different parts of my body. You know, I've had cavity searches, rectal searches. The Israelis also had a habit of doing strip searches on me with women in the room. So some female officers would be in the room while I was getting strip searched. You know, and of course, like I want to sort of really convey the humiliation of that. You know, there are very few people who want to be strip searched in front of anybody. And of course, I don't. I don't. And as any of the men or people who've interacted with most men who are naked will know, like, you know, when you're in that sort of situation, it's particularly vulnerable. It's particularly easy to feel humiliated. And that's exactly the intention. And, you know, when I'm standing there in a cold room, like my penis is shriveled up, you know, I'm like shivering. And there's some guy looking at me and some woman sitting beside him who I know for a fact doesn't have to be there, just sort of watching and throwing crude comments at me, about the size of my penis, about, you know, like basically everything like that. I mean, that is a particular kind of humiliation that Palestinians deal with daily. You know, the prisoners who've been coming out are children, they're children. And these children were saying the exact same things that I experienced. And by the way, yes, I experienced these things at Erez. I experienced them in Ben Gurion. I experienced them in Paris as well. I once was in Paris going into the Israeli consulate. And to go into the Israeli consulate, because I needed a piece of paper signed basically by them, they strip searched me in Paris, in the Israeli consulate, strip searched me, you know, right down in an incredibly cold room with the same pattern of male and female and video and all of that stuff. So it's that kind of humiliation, like it's almost pathologically ingrained into the Israeli system. And that's why when I heard Palestinian prisoners reporting it, I knew it was true. I'd experienced it.
well, thank you for that. Are you still you were there a lot? You worked when you were there. You were often at Al Shifa Hospital. Were you at other hospitals, or were you only at Al Shifa? You were doing emergency medicine there?
Yeah, I was primarily at Al Shifa Hospital. Al Shifa is the largest hospital. It was built in I think 45, 46, you know, quite some time ago. Not the oldest hospital. The oldest hospital would be Al Ma'madani, which is Al Ahli Presbyterian, or no, Al Ahli Baptist, sorry, Baptist Hospital. Um, and really, in terms of the hospitals, it was fine to be in any hospital, but because I felt that I was part of a capacity building exercise, I didn't really see it as appropriate to be in one of the NGO or private hospitals. I wanted to be in a hospital where there was direct accountability to the people in the Gaza Strip. And of course, it's complicated in that, you know, there haven't been elections in a while and so on. However, I feel like, and what I've experienced traveling around the world and working in different countries, I feel like working with the ministries of health is the closest you can get to the people and the most accountable you can get to the actual people. So that's the main reason why I worked in Shifa Hospital.
Now, the terrible images that came out about the Israeli attack on, I hate to even bring this up with you, but what your reflections on, you must perhaps, you certainly recognize some of the physical facilities. You may even recognize some of the people. Um, Give us a sense of how you reacted to those images.
So whenever I've attended several wars in Gaza and numerous escalations. Like it's impossible. I go for usually a month at a time. I go for 4 months a year. And it's impossible to go on one of these 4-week trips without seeing a tremendous amount of suffering, a tremendous amount of pain. And very regularly, almost every trip, there will be some minor escalation. By minor, I mean they only kill a dozen people or they only kill, 24 people, something small, in strong air quotes. So really, in terms of going to Shifa, we were always used to that, but we always felt safe in Shifa, thinking that of all of the places in Gaza that are going to get bombed, Shifa is the last. And now I had like some foreshadowing that this wasn't exactly true. In 2012, I was actually sleeping in a vehicle in the parking lot when a missile hit the edge of the parking lot and tipped the vehicle off of 2 of its wheels. It didn't flip over, but it came off of 2 of its wheels and came back down. So I'm very aware that the Israelis know where Shifa is and know how to target it. But I always kind of felt like, aside from these attacks on the edges, that it would be a relatively safe place. And this delusion was shared by most of my colleagues who worked there, right? We just thought, like, nobody could really want to destroy the biggest hospital in the Gaza Strip, could they? Like, it was unthinkable. And I truly believe that right to the last moment, there were doctors in there who were in denial about the fact that Israel could come in and Israel could do what it did to Shifa. The people who were there, it's not just that, like, obviously I was seeing them in the video. Any video of Shifa, the odds were that I was going to recognize the people who worked there, the nurses, the doctors, the support staff. And they had been telling me what was going on. I'd been getting day by day sort of updates, partly because I was interested and because I was transmitting it to other people who needed to know, partly because I was involved in several projects that needed sort of bidirectional communication. Like, for example, the stethoscope project. I know that one of the participants, Cliff, is asking me to talk a little bit about the stethoscope, but right now, I think the tourniquet is a little bit more appropriate. And the tourniquet project involved us communicating with them. How are the tourniquets? How are they performing? What are they doing? Are they breaking? Are they working? Especially when time went on and our ability to quality assure them degraded. Our offices were bombed almost immediately. And the other offices that supported us were bombed. We're not entirely sure when, but it didn't really matter because nobody could move to operate in them anyway. So
are you talking
that
about currently, like
happening.
you're talking about in this most recent, like the last 2 months? That's what you're talking about? Or, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah. We had split our offices in 2 because we thought, okay, we knew we've been threatened by the Israelis previously. And in 2021, one of our offices was bombed after we'd made the decision to split. So I thought, oh, okay, great. Like, we made the right decision. And then that second office just relocated somewhere else. And this war, I mean, it doesn't matter if we had 100 offices, nobody's producing anything. You can't. They destroyed the solar panels. It was impossible for people to safely travel anywhere. Like, it just, all of the ingredients of making a medical device that's of use to a civilian population were not there. So, however, that's why I was communicating with people, because we were following the performance of these devices over time. There isn't, when the Israelis finally invaded Shifa and took it over, the people who they arrested were my friends. They're my colleagues. Some of them were my students. And I know for a fact that these people didn't do any of the things that they are being accused of. And in fact, the funny thing is, I don't think the Israelis have charged anybody yet. They're just making wild accusations in public. And I know now, because there's already been a couple released for a fact, that they're being tortured. Over what? Because they're doctors. Because they're doctors. And because you want to talk about a failure of us as a civil society, we allowed Israel to float this narrative. They floated a trial balloon with Al-Ahli. How many was it? 500 casualties. I don't remember exactly how many deaths. And it was a brutal massacre. And we, the people of the West, the people who are supposed to be the brakes on this regime, we were like, yeah, who really knows who fired this rocket? And we allowed that lie to perpetuate. We allowed it to happen. And so the Israelis took that and ran with it. And every single major hospital has been destroyed now. The only one that is in any way functional is European Gaza Hospital. And that is so far, so what? So your hospital hasn't been bombed. They don't have equipment. They don't have electricity. They don't have sufficient electricity. They don't have materials. They can't transport people. At the end of the day, you have to bring people to your hospital. The civil defense has no available vehicles right now. There's no fire trucks. People are standing outside, homes on fire, listening to civilians burn to death because the Israelis have destroyed the only fire trucks in Gaza. So I've fully lost track of exactly where your question was, Peter, so you can feel free to redirect me, but thank you for letting me meander.
I'm sorry, I was so fascinated by your meandering, I've forgotten what the original question was as well. But it was really around whether you still have contact with people now, and have they all been forced? The ones who haven't been arrested or being held, have they all fled to the south as well? It's very difficult to get contact now with what's going on, but what's the level of your contact with people now?
Yeah, my contact is excellent with lots of people. It's difficult. Of course, you have to contact people in very, very creative ways and communicate with people indirectly sometimes. But no, we fully understand what's happening in Gaza. Do not think that we've lost track of what's happening. So, I'm going to describe this a little bit to you in terms of what's happening right now at Shifa. Okay, so Shifa has been thoroughly destroyed. It's destroyed. It is not usable as a hospital by any definition of the word. Okay. And ultimately, even if the physical infrastructure were intact, and it is not, for example, Shifa depended on its own water wells because the Israelis cut water off, right? In 2014, they bombed all the water wells around Gaza. It was impossible. And so Shifa basically sunk some of its own water wells. Well, those were bombed. Okay. The last water well, which we didn't think was going to get bombed, produced 250 milliliters of water per hour. And we thought they'll give us that. Nope, that was destroyed. And so there is zero water capacity into Shifa. And of course, there's zero water capacity in Gaza. It's not like the water's flowing through the pipes of Gaza's city water system. It's not. The electricity system, of course, is completely degraded. The generators are being allowed to run at very, very small amounts. The main generators were blown up by the Israelis while they were in there. So the solar panels were destroyed. And that hits me particularly hard personally, because me and a bunch of people were involved and led a project called Empower Gaza, in which we placed ultimately solar panels on 10 hospitals in Gaza. When you see, if people want to go look around some of the hospitals on Google Maps on the satellite view, like Indonesian hospital, like that was Empower Gaza's work. Al-Aqsa, that was Empower Gaza's work. If you sort of look at all of these major hospitals, that had a lot to do. Shifa wasn't our work. Shifa was the work of a Japanese group called JICA, who was the one who kind of got us all thinking about it. But when they took out the solar panels, that meant that all the ICU beds couldn't be helped. And there was no other way to kind of progress. There had been some that were used for incubator care. They're gone. The electricity stuff is gone. It's all gone. But I always think of a medical system as consisting of the three components. You know, when I was thinking about like my own work, I always tell people, well, it has to happen in three major domains. Those three domains were destroyed. We just talked about the infrastructural domain. You know, if you don't even have a hospital to walk into, there's no conversation. There's no conversation about medical care. You need a hospital. You need a place. You need a roof. You need walls. You need the basic components. The second thing, and of course, electricity and water being part of that infrastructure. The second thing is you need the people. The people have been destroyed psychologically, killed. So far, it's, I think, 300 people who have been killed from the medical sector. And that's in addition to, I think, 35 more paramedics, or have been sent out to other places. So, you know, Peter, like, let's say, for example, if I were to send you to a different house, somebody else's house, you know, and tell you, okay, get used to this place. The stakes are low. You're just in another house, but you're disoriented. It's hard to do things. Now multiply and magnify that disorientation into teams that work in critical life-saving, life-threatening scenarios. And you can see the problem of doctors being reassigned to hospitals. So most of my colleagues who work in Shifa are not working right now. So you might think, well, but isn't there a need for doctors? The answer is yes. But a doctor without tools is nothing. That's just a person who does first aid. Mm-hmm. And that's what the entire medical system has been reduced to. So I want to take you back to October 14th, right? There's this famous video in which basically the Israelis attacked civil defense. Civil defense are like what we would consider the firefighters. They're a mixture of firefighters and ambulanciers. They themselves aren't medical as such, but if you've ever seen the people in the orange jumpers, that's civil defense. Civil defense are widely considered the bravest. They're the ones who go into, you know, the worst situations. There are four ambulance services. They're all courageous beyond what I can imagine, but we're talking about civil defense right now. Civil defense's main headquarters was bombed, and by the Israelis. Just, you know, let's not be too passive voice here, and say like, oh, civil defense's building spontaneously combusted, as CNN might say. So civil defense was bombed by the Israelis. And of course, there were lots of people killed. But one thing that I took tremendous comfort in is that when the rescuers were coming in, excuse me, were coming in with victims, they were performing CPR. I mean, you have to have faith in the system to be performing CPR, because you're doing something that needs a tremendous amount of aftercare and resuscitation. You need blood. You need an operating room. You need an intensive care bed. It's like, okay, this is still normal war material right now. By the time you get to around November 1, November 2, you're starting to really see the huge strain on the system. And doctors started saying that they were only involved when things were very, very bad. So doctors only truly got engaged when things were absolutely at their most terrible. And that's sort of the situation in which we found ourselves for a good period of time, where they were saying like, you know, look, I intervene if I think that it's something that doesn't need too much work in the aftercare, it doesn't need an ICU bed, maybe doesn't need an OR. Now they can't even do that. Perfectly salvageable. Salvageable is the medical term. You know, savable, I guess, would be a much worse term, but still one that most lay people would appreciate and understand. And so, now people who are salvageable are no longer being treated. And that's kind of the situation up until when Shifa was occupied. After that, and until now, it's strictly first aid. It's strictly first aid. Somebody who has a 50% chance of survival or a 70% chance of survival might be left unattended because they don't have the material for that. For example, let's say you have an amputation. Okay. Well, what does that mean? You have an amputation, you need to stop the bleeding, right? So use a tourniquet. Once you stop the bleeding, you have to replace the blood. Okay. So you need material to get blood from somebody. And during the war, what we do is we let family members give each other blood so that you don't have to do testing, because obviously the assays aren't available to do the testing. And then you have to operate to stop this spot from doing its things. And of course, that requires materials, time, and expertise. And then you can't just send that person home. You have to do post-care. They might get infected. You might have to give them antibiotics. And so doctors were telling me that even these otherwise simple, straightforward surgical procedures that I would be able to do, I'm not a surgeon, but I would probably be able to do, are no longer possible because they require too many other things. And somebody who just lost their arm or lost a leg should never have died, guys.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it to the audience. I remind people to put your questions in the Q&A, and my colleague Grafton Ross will pick them up. I would like to move just from I'm not sure what the medical terminology is, but I want to turn our gaze a little bit to a public health kind of perspective. The physical destruction has been terrible. The dead and wounded is terrible. But as we move into Palestinians face a situation of all the things that you're talking about, water problems and so on. The Secretary General of the UN today invoked Clause 99 or Section 99 of the UN Charter, saying we're on the edge of a human catastrophe and urging the international community to interact. Can you flesh that out a little bit before I turn to questions from others?
Oh, boy. The main responsible, culpable party here is Israel. The responsibility is all theirs. They are the ones who are slaughtering civilians. They are the ones who cut off water, food, electricity. They're the ones who are responsible. Okay? I don't want you to forget that when I say what comes next. I've been looking at the international response, the WHO, and especially because I'm from the health sector, but the UN in general. And honestly, fuck those guys. They now are looking at an absolute obvious genocide in progress and saying, please stop. Fundamentally, that's what Antonio Guterres is saying. Please stop. They are doing, for all intents and purposes, not enough. They're not doing enough in terms of pressuring the Israelis. They're not doing enough in terms of talking to the world about how to pressure the Israelis. They are not doing enough today, okay? So all that I hear from Guterres, all that I hear from UNICEF, James Elder, to me, is a fucking hero. James Elder is not doing enough. The UNICEF is not doing enough. The United Nations is not doing enough. These are all multinational, massive organizations. They have things they can do. For example, take a fucking truck and try to drive it in. Make it an issue. Make it an issue. You could find so many drivers who would be willing to drive those trucks.
Eric, on that, who's stopping those from Egypt? Who's stopping physically? Who's stopping those? Why can't they do? Is it Egypt that's stopping it? Is it certainly it's not Hamas that's stopping it. Who's stopping trucks from going from Egypt into Gaza?
Yeah, the hitmen are Egyptian, but it's obviously the Americans who are stopping them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, Like this, let's make no mistake about the ultimate culpability here for what's happening in Egypt. Egypt is nothing as a country. You know, if the Americans said open the border, they'd open the border. If they said close the border, they close the border. That doesn't mean that they don't have agency. They do have agency, of course, but the Americans have a tremendous lever on them, which is lever of money, lever of weaponry, lever of legitimacy. The Egyptian government right now is a military dictatorship. Their entire, you know, capability of existing is propped up on American sort of diplomatic and military and economic support. So it's the Americans stopping the aid from getting in. The Americans who sailed into the Mediterranean Sea to basically stop anybody else from intervening. Like if you really wanted a fair fight, which I guess obviously nobody in a war wants a fair fight, everybody wants to win, you know, then it would be different. I don't frankly care if Qassam, the military wing of Hamas, and the Israelis go and slaughter each other to a man. I don't care. What I do deeply care about here is the involvement of civilians. And, you know, obviously, like, here I am, angry, upset, you know, in my own way, embarrassed. And I really do think that it's important for us to sort of say, like, the reason we're all here is because civilians are involved. You know, only an idiot would take that statement as me saying that I don't care about Israeli civilians. But there are lots of idiots out there. Obviously, I care about them. But right now, the genocide is against Palestinian civilians, and there are things people can do. But even aside from that, also, we've all been watching this, warning about these kinds of things for decades. This is not Israel's first round. And Israel didn't suddenly gain impunity. It's been building up impunity. And so this move happens with such comfort and ease on the Israeli side because of the work that groups like the United Nations, groups like the World Health Organization, all these organizations have done to lay the groundwork for this genocide. This is where, when we talk about complicity, the culpability is clear, it's Israel's, but the complicity really does exist. It's very, very wide. And, you know, with all due respect to our friends at Human Rights Watch, they come out in the middle of this thing to basically blame the Palestinians for their own massacre at Al Ahli while actively admitting that they don't really know what's going on. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And so I'm glad that these guys have come around. I wish that it made me less upset to see them come around, because at the end of the day, they did come around. They came around when? And even so, like, what's Section 99 going to do exactly? You know, you don't really need the United Nations to be talking. You need the United Nations to be acting. And that's the thing that I don't see.
Okay. Grafton, if you got some, I see some questions are in there already. I encourage you again to put your questions in the question period. Grafton, what have we got for us?
There are many, many questions and many expressions of gratitude for your moving testimony. There are a number of questions regarding tunnels. So could you tell us, did you see any evidence of tunnels or any evidence of Hamas fighters at Al-Shifa or in anywhere else that you're aware of in Gaza?
No, the tunnels thing is a lie. It's a lie. And it's a lie that I was first introduced to in 2008, 2009. That's not because it hadn't been floated before. It was floated apparently in the 2006 war, but, you know, I wasn't really, like, I was in the middle of med school. I wasn't really paying that much attention at that exact time. 2008, 2009, I was paying attention to that war. It was basically at this time of year, right? It was December running into January. And they talked about these tunnels. That was before I'd ever gone to Shifa for the first time. And so I'm like, you know, maybe tunnels. Before the tunnels, it turns out, like in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they talked about Shifa as housing Fidaiyin. And before the tunnels, like in 2005, they said that it was just a straight up command center, that like they had offices for Hamas. I think all of this, it depends on a few things. First is an intimate lack of understanding of how Gaza runs. Gaza is more or less half Hamas, half Palestinian Authority type people. And they, I mean, I wouldn't say they hate each other in the like, I'm going to kill you sense, even though it sometimes comes to that. I would say they like hate each other in the Maple Leafs Canadians sense, right? Where it's like they vie for power, they want their friends in power, they kind of work at it and all of this. If there was even an inkling of Hamas using Shifa, Shifa is a common good. If there was even an inkling of Hamas using Shifa in any way that was untoward, the people on the other side would know it. Like, just like you might have a brother or sister who's a Canadians fan, you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. There are people who are Fatah and Hamas who are brother and sister, brother and brother, whatever. Or siblings, I guess. And so there is no way that it would happen without Palestinians knowing. It's an impossibility, right? Like at the end of the day, Qassam and Hamas aren't magical. They have to dig somewhere. They have to build something. They have to do things. And so, it would be noted in those places. Somebody would see something. And the Fatah people would instantly tattle. Like, I don't mean tattle in the sense of collaborate with the Israelis. I'm talking about like even holding Palestinians accountable in Palestine. Like we have rules. We have rules. And to me, actually, and so of course, since 2011, I've been freely circulating. And like, there are so few places you can go in Shifa. There aren't that many buildings. It's a relatively small campus, right? Like, there's nowhere to hide anything. And so I've been everywhere, every nook, every cranny. I've probably napped there if it's quiet. I've probably, taken phone calls from there, tried to do work there, gone for walks there, especially when things are escalated and you can't really go outside the compound. Like, I've been everywhere. I've never seen anything resembling that. But the Israelis aren't telling these lies for people like me or people who believe people like me, right? So I tell you, oh, that's not the case. They've never presented any evidence. They've never put forward, like, what is a 3D rendering evidence now? It's basically like an excerpt from a video game. I don't think so. So even when they had full, unrestricted access and control of Shifa, did they produce tunnels? No. They even knew where tunnels had been built historically and tried to open them up. And they discovered what we all already knew, which is that they were not convenient for the renovators of Shifa as the complex grew. And so they were covered over. Like, that's all they discovered. But if what you're doing is taking Israeli accusations and then finding refutations, you're doomed. You're doomed. Because the Israelis will always have a new allegation. As soon as you debunk one, they've already moved on to the next lie, and the next lie, and the next lie, and the next lie. And so, Ahli, I didn't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see the fragments, but I knew that they had killed two of my colleagues during the last war, I guess 2 wars ago, in one of the hospitals when they shelled it and then lied about it. I knew that when they shot me, okay, so this one I definitely knew, I was shot by an Israeli. That's obvious. That's so clear. And I know that because a commission of inquiry investigated and made, without having the Israelis engaged, the best sort of assessment that they could make, that said that, yeah, this man was shot by Israelis. But at the time, not only did they say I wasn't shot by Israelis, they said I wasn't shot at all. And there were, in The Hill, a very important paper in Canadian politics, there was an article that says we don't even think he was shot at all. I mean, it's gaslighting par excellence. We all understand this terminology now, thanks to our brothers and sisters in the Me Too movement. Like, they have helped us get it, and we're watching it all unfold. one of the reasons this is so destabilizing, and I'll just make this one last point, Peter, before we can move on to the next question. One of the reasons it's so destabilizing is because we always knew that they being the powers that be, the fucking CIA, Mossad, whatever, we always knew that they would lie to us sometimes. You know, oh, there was a false flag or whatever, Tankeen, and we've all heard about these kinds of things. We didn't know that the lies could be 100% of what's coming out of their mouths. And that is what's happening right now with the Israeli propaganda machine. Israel's propaganda is basically lies around the clock, lies about civilians, lies about babies being dolls, lies about Palestinians not really dying. Like, the number one response whenever any journalist asks a spokesperson of the Israeli army is to be gaslit. You know, like the Rantisi video. Did you guys watch this video? Where they're literally in the basement of Rantisi's a pediatric hospital. And this guy is going around pointing to things, being like, Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. And this is obviously an indication. He points to a calendar with the days of the week written on it and says, look at this. This is a schedule. And it's like, it's literally got an official stamp from a hospital official that it's clearly a, like, you know, a calendar that was prepared for who was going to be on call for that night. And he's like, see, these are the names of the terrorists. And it's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, obviously in Arabic, but it was crazy. So yeah, I would say really, we shouldn't particularly feel the need to debunk these things in real time. People will do that for us. And if the Israelis were actually interested, they would open it up. They would bring in independent investigators. They'd say, hey, look, Shifa is so clearly a Hamas bunker that we're going to let anybody in the world come and see. And trust me, I would be the first one to light Hamas on fire if I ever heard that they were doing something like this. I'd be the very first one. I have no love for Hamas. I have no love for anybody who would abuse a hospital. Like, you know, at the end of the day, that's my home. And I'd be the first one there. But these are lies. It was a lie in Al Ahli, it's a lie in Shifa, it's a lie in Rantisi, it's a lie in all of these places. And, you know, they just took over Jabalia Hospital yesterday. Same set of lie. I mean, actually, for better or worse, they're not even lying about Jabalia. They're just like, yeah, we took the fucking hospital. What are you going to do about it? Yeah, I'll try to stop swearing too, Peter.
This is a adult program, so all right, you can use the F word once per answer. Grafton, another one.
Yes. Could you relay what you're hearing from Gazans since the Israeli invasion? And a related question, sort of, what are Gazans' sort of perceptions of Hamas, maybe before and after the events?
Okay, I will talk about that. First, I just wanted to make a very quick comment about one of the questions that's here about Canadian Friends of Sabil. So this person, I'm not sure if you want me to name you or if your name is visible to others, but this person basically says that in 2019, I was involved in a project to raise funds for solar panels in Al Ahli Hospital. This is true. We raised, I think, to start, $20,000 to $30,000 with, may he rest in peace, Robert Asali and Yara Shufani and many other incredible organizers with Canadian Friends of Sabil, which for those who don't immediately know is a Christian organization because Al Ahli is a Christian hospital. And because Al Ahli is a Christian hospital, in no way disentangles it from Palestine. 30% of Palestinians are Christian. And it really puts a lie to the idea that this is a religious conflict. Was St. Porphyrius Church spared because it was a Christian place? No. Was Al Ahli spared because it was a Christian hospital? No. Were Christians spared? They've been slaughtered en masse too, just like everybody else. So that particular hospital, we ended up building a bunch of solar panels that were enough to run lots of their diagnostics, which is very energy intensive. They had a beautiful breast cancer center there. I kept looking at like images to answer the question. I do know that the Israelis bombed the solar panels. I don't know how much of them is still useful. I would assume none. And this leads us into another thing, which is that we will have to rebuild after, and we cannot fail to rebuild, right? The Israelis want us to go backwards. What we have to do is every time these things happen, rebuild better. Okay, now back to your question, Grafton. Basically, you were sort of asking, what am I hearing from on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
I think after the ceasefire, things, and this is probably not news to most people who've been following the situation, things have gotten much, much, much worse. The Israelis had said, oh, everybody go south and you'll be safe. And, Hamas is in the north and you don't have to worry. And like, obviously that was a lie. It was pretty clear there was a program of genocide. The Israelis said it. It's not like they weren't saying it. They were saying we want genocide in Gaza. Literally, if you were to go look up the #1 song in Gaza, in Israel right now, it's more or less a genocidal song. Some of the leadership has been talking about turning Khan Yunis into a soccer field, which, that's not because they want to plant greenery there. That's because they want to level it. And so it's been clear that they wanted to go after the South, but I think because of the psychological need and because the South was relatively spared, it was like a normal war in the South, whereas it was a true genocide in the North. I think people kind of didn't fully expect what was going to happen after the ceasefire. The other thing was the ceasefire gave the Israelis exactly what they wanted on October 8th. They wanted their hostages back. And it showed a path to getting the hostages back through negotiation. The military operations, which at that point I think had lasted about 50 days, never once liberated a hostage. I think there was one, I'm going to say now, fake hostage that somehow miraculously appeared. They're like, oh, look at this hostage we freed, with no video of her liberation, no video of anything, and then a bunch of social media posts while this person was supposedly captive of her on the beach in Israel. So the odds are that that was a psyop rather than an actual rescue. Basically, my friends have all gotten to the point where they want to die. And that's really hard for me to listen to, because like, I'm not the kind of person who thinks that death is the worst thing. I've seen tremendous amounts of suffering. And even though, kind of like my religious background, I'm Muslim, so my religious background says like, don't commit suicide. The reality is that like, I can fully understand why they don't see any reason to live anymore. Every single day, I'll tell you about one of my friends. I don't know, maybe what name should I give her? Anyway, maybe I just won't name her for right now. So this is a person who I've worked with very closely for many years. And when at the beginning of the war we started chatting, she would tell me about how much she would do with the ambulance services. She has nothing to do with medical system, but felt a compulsion to volunteer for the ambulance services, especially in times of war. So every time there were attacks, she would be out there picking up pieces and bodies on the front lines. Like, this woman is hardcore. And something happened when the Al Ahli bombing happened, that she was part of the rescue crew, that totally destroyed her psychologically. Like, she just told me that, I don't know what I just saw. I don't know what I was just part of, but all I know is that I can never do that again. And the messages that she sent, at that time there was really no audio or anything, so it was just messages. They were heartbreaking. A person who had discovered her psychological limit and passed it. And so at that point, her husband, their very young child, 5 or 6 months old, who had run out of formula, milk, clean water, everything long ago. She had stopped making breast milk because of the stress. All of them escaped to the south, the relative safety of the south. And day on day, she would just try to survive, try to find milk for her child, try to find something. The child is 5 months old, hasn't had milk in a couple of weeks now. Yesterday when I was talking to her, she had just gone back out because the house beside the house she was staying at was targeted. The general rule is that the house that's targeted will have 0 survivors, and the houses around it will have some survivors. So she's already been wounded twice, by the way, in these bombings. And so she got out because she was in the house beside the one that was targeted, and she picked up the pieces of the people around. And she said a lot of things. She described what she saw. She described picking up pieces. She said it felt like they were pieces of dolls because they were so small. Children who, like, I think we can all agree, should never be in that position. And at the end, she basically said, like, I just wish that the next bomb hits me so that I don't have to feel this pain anymore. Any of you who are on Twitter, on social media, you're seeing that. Like Martez, a really famous journalist for people who are of a particular generation, he said that. Hind Khodari, another voice of the younger generation, she said that. I don't hear older people saying that out loud, but when I talk to them, I can feel it. And you know what? Like, I totally understand that feeling, because I think for all of us, life is pain. We sit here watching the worst things happening to our brothers, sisters, siblings in Gaza, and we suffer for them. I mean, not as much as they do. I totally understood why somebody would self-immolate. Somebody burned themselves when the ceasefire ended. I forget exactly where. I understood why they would do it. Do I think you should do it? No. If you're feeling suicidal, like, call me. Let's talk. But really, I think that the biggest change since the ceasefire is that everybody knows, like, the whole world knows. Nobody can pretend they didn't know. And Palestinians know they know. And it's still happening. And I think that another month of this, the Israelis have been given until January 1st by the Americans. Another month of this. I mean, I don't know how any of us can survive it.
Tarek,
I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And as are a number of the participants on this call. There's a couple of questions, a number of questions from about what people can do. So much financial aid is needed to help Palestinians. As a doctor, are there any organizations which you believe have top priority for aid?
Yeah, in terms of the organizations that I've seen as most effective so far, they've been really, in Canada, we have very few options. The main option in Canada is Islamic Relief Canada and IDRF, International Development and Relief Foundation, I think it's called. I forget. But those are probably the two that actually operate in Gaza and where you can get charitable status. If you don't care about charitable status, then the main one probably is medical aid for Palestinians. They're really, really effective. And PCRF, Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, I think it is. Both of those are very, very effective. PCRF is home-based in the United States, and it's a 401c3. So I think you could, if you have American status, you can get that. Medical aid for Palestinians is based in the UK. They don't have any tax stuff there because of their system there. But these are highly effective organizations. You know, I work with GLIA, so I'll just say, like, if you're interested in medical devices and sort of indigenously making medical devices, we're always looking for help, financial, engineering help, medical help, clinical help, etc., production help. But really, right now, I would say that, you know, the top priority would be some of these immediate medical relief missions. These relief missions, so far, MAP has not gotten anybody in. The only organization that has gotten people in has been ICRC. I believe another delegation has been told they will be allowed in, but hasn't yet gone in. So ICRC is the only one that's getting anybody in, but I don't recommend giving them money. ICRC has plenty of money. They do not need your money. And their problem isn't a money problem. Their problem is that they have these principles of neutrality that basically neuter them from being able to do anything. Today or yesterday, the president of ICRC made a statement that was, let's be honest, milquetoast. And everybody was like, oh my God, holy shit, like, you got to understand, you know, ICRC doesn't do this. Yeah, man, we're looking at a fucking genocide. Like, yeah, I hope they would say something. You know, neutrality shouldn't go that far. Which I'm going to pull out into another thing, which I've noticed, which is that a lot of the things that you and I and people on this call hold dear and have worked very, very hard for are being weaponized against us. So, for example, neutrality. Neutrality is a good thing. Like, we fought a lot for organizations to maintain neutrality and not be biased, you know, all that stuff. But organizations and governments like Israel, the United States, even Canada, have weaponized neutrality, so that essentially neutrality is to support the aggressor against the person being aggressed upon. The other kind of thing that we worked very hard for that has been weaponized against us is the concept of psychological safety. Think how hard people in my generation, for example, and generations before me, worked so that the people in the generation after me, like I'm a associate professor, I teach medical students, and those medical students can now tell me, I feel unsafe in this environment, or I feel unsafe with that teacher, and I have to take it seriously, you know, because we built a system where that stuff is serious. Now, the concept of safety has been weaponized against us, so that people who are calling for an end to war crimes, an end to genocide, or people who are calling for human rights are being called into question as making other people feel unsafe. So, and of course, right now, there's a concept that I haven't fully unpacked that I'll introduce, but try not to delve into too much because I don't fully know what's going on, which is the sort of concept of Me Too, believe the victims, believe the women. Victims being like much wider than just women in sexual assaults, where it appears that the Israelis are willing to weaponize that concept against us. You generally know that these concepts are being weaponized against you because they're one way. They're in one direction. So, for example, if I feel unsafe, it doesn't matter. There have been no pro-genocide, pro-Israel voices who have been silenced, who have been suspended, arrested, you know, any of that stuff. Simultaneously, there have been multiple Palestinian voices who have been, including people who've said absolutely nothing. You know, in my case, I was arrested and literally put in jail on allegations of ketchup. You know, like, it's ridiculous. There's no way that if a white supremacist from the convoy had gone and sprayed ketchup on this MP's office, that there would be any discussion of jail time. It would be ridiculous. Okay, thank you again, Peter, for letting me
That's
meander.
okay. I'll say two things.
I'll answer one tiny question, and then hand it over to you. The first Canadian organization for Maryland was Islamic Relief Canada, and IDRF is the other one. I think those are the two.
Actually, what I was going to say on that, Tarek, is that I will be sending a follow-up email to all the participants on this. We can put the websites of, I know that Islamic Relief Canada has a special website for Palestinian relief. We can put those on. And also we can include the GLIA website as well. And I also told Tarek that the Ottawa Forum on Israel Palestine will be making a contribution to him that he can apply either to his legal fees or to an organization that he wants to. So that's in recognition of your time here. On this thing about being neutral, I have been frequently accused of denialism because I suspend my belief a little bit on listening to the Israeli versions of what happened on October 7th. I don't know what happened, but experience has taught me that what they say isn't always the complete truth. And even I think Tarek has a stronger version of that. But if you raise it into question at all, you get accused of denialism, kind of like you're denying the Holocaust or something like that. So I think it's totally unfair and unreasonable. I think we should all maintain a skeptical positioning in order to retain our faculties and listen to it. We know that in war, everybody lies, and you have to be careful about what you hear. Graf's a couple more questions, and then we're going to see how the doctor is faring here.
Sure. One participant's asking specifically about the babies in the incubators and specifically about what happened to the mothers of these babies. And more generally, another participant is asking, and maybe this is getting a little ahead of things, what can be done now to help the multitudes of traumatized and wounded and maimed? And who will protect the orphan children?
Okay. I'm just going to write a little note for myself here. All right. So when you say incubators, the first question is, which incubators? Because the reality is that Israel precipitated a crisis in multiple hospitals related to incubators. Like, do you remember that there were 39 Palestinian children, premature born children, most of them, some of them pulled from the uteruses of their dead mothers in what's called a perimortem cesarean section? Do you remember those 39? Because we seem to have kind of forgotten about them because of this new horror. And those 39, they had the entire attention of the world on them. And I believe at this point, 3 or 4 of them have already died. Because this is not how you deal with premature babies. You don't turn off everything, huddle them together, transport them to different hospitals that can't care for them, without oxygen. Like, it's just not how you do it. Of course, they're dying. And the ones who do survive, of course, as those of you in the medical field know, these periods where people are premature, they need absolute serenity, calm, peace. They need consistency. They need food. They need all of the things, because that impacts their future growth. And so even the ones who do survive will be damaged, will be hurt, will be injured. Every one of those 39 babies would have probably been killed if not for what we did as a public. And I didn't know that until I saw what the Israelis did in Nasser Hospital. It really took me for a loop. All I could really think is it's not possible. It's not possible that some human being looked at these 5 babies who were alive and said, no, we'll just leave them there to die and rot. And I thought, it's just impossible. How can a human being can't do that? I needed for my own emotional well-being, I needed to believe that was not possible. Like I knew the end result, but like, and then of course I had to run through, well, could somebody have forgotten, there's a fog of war, maybe somebody forgot, maybe this, maybe that. And then when it really kind of became clear to me was when I was walking, I'm in my basement right now, my home. And while I was walking, we had like a little infestation of ants and put a bunch of poison. I saw this ant very slowly trudging along. And I knew it was dying. It was pretty clear that it had taken in some of the poison. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel sad for the ant because it wasn't really anything to me. And I think that was kind of the moment at which I really was able to assemble. Like we've been talking about the threat of dehumanization. We've been talking about its potential impact. Like, how could I not have put the two together sooner? That's what happens. That Israeli soldier who executed those children, who condemned them to death, that Israeli soldier probably felt as bad about it as I did about that ant, because they were not people to him. And if they were people to him, then they were people who were going to grow up into Hitlers, people who were premature Hamas. So it was, what happened there is pretty clear. We know the events. We know the sequence of events very, very well now. It was expounded in Electronic Intifada in an article by Nora Barrows-Friedman. And essentially, the sequence of events is this. The Israelis surround the hospital. The parents of some of the children were there. Some of them have no parents. Some of them had no parents because they're all dead now. And the nurses were all rounded up at gunpoint and told to leave. They pleaded for the lives of the premature children and were told by one of the soldiers that arrangements had been made with the ICRC to collect the children, to collect the premature babies. One of the nurses, one of the preemies had been in there for a while now, since before the war. One of the nurses said, in that case, leave us here until we can hand over the patients to the ICRC. And they were told no. She says that the moment they told her that they wouldn't be allowed to supervise the children until the handover, she already knew they were dead. And she says that it was one of the most difficult moral decisions of her life, because she thought if she fought it, she would just be executed, which is very likely true. Once the families were forced out, the nurses were forced out, the medical teams were forced out, the equipment was either turned off or allowed to go off by virtue of not having any power, any electricity. There was no oxygen. Feeding ran out. And over the next 17 days, all of the children died and their bodies began to decompose. 17 days after that, a journalist entered, and that journalist was the one who recorded it. And if that journalist had not had the bravery, the journalist was very well aware that these dead children were there. Nobody doubted that these children were dead. And in fact, if you go back to contemporaneous reports, they were all begging the world to do something. Nobody doubted it. And he went, and if not for his courage, I think the Israelis would have just denied it. And we'd have been stupid enough to not believe the Palestinians, because at least for me, I would have had to try to maintain my own sense of humanity, which doesn't fit with somebody cold-bloodedly killing 5 premature babies.
Afton, can we get one or two
no,
more questions before I'd like to save some time at the end of
yes,
this to talk to Dr. Loubani about what he thinks we as Canadians can best be doing. But maybe we can take one or two more questions. Would you mind?
sure. Yeah, so there's a whole constellation of questions around what can Canadians be doing at this time to be most effective. Um, there are a number of other questions related to how and when and if Israel will ever be held accountable, and what would the mechanisms for that be?
I don't know. I don't think anybody cares about, like, of course the Palestinians want accountability, but accountability is not going to bring back their families. And accountability without justice is meaningless. Like in South Africa, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened, it happened after liberation, not before. And I think that you can't have truth and reconciliation, as we see in Canada, right? Like Canada has truth and reconciliation happening before the liberation of Indigenous people. And it becomes empty. Like, for example, you have dead Indigenous women and government officials swearing that they'll never look for them, even when we more or less know exactly where the bodies are. So I think, like, look, yes, I want accountability. We all want accountability. I remember when I was shot, Trudeau asked me if I wanted an inquiry. And I said, no. I was like, I don't care about an inquiry. And he was surprised. I had the same interaction with Freeland at the time. And they're both surprised. And we're kind of like, well, why not? I said, well, because the Israelis are going to block an inquiry. At the end of the day, the only way to discover anything is for it to be independent. And even if an inquiry determines that I was shot by the Israelis, what are you going to do about it? I would much rather if you take all the time and effort and spend it making the lives of Palestinians better. So do I want accountability? Like, yeah, of course. I mean, who doesn't want accountability in this case? But is it my first priority? No. My very first priority is to stop the killing right now. My second priority is to put back the shattered pieces of people's lives, of people's psyches, of people's souls. And that's going to take a long, long, long time. In 50 years, there will be people who were never the same from this day onward. And that includes us, by the way. That doesn't just include the Palestinians. They are the #1 victims, and we can never lose track of that. They're the center of the gravity of this movement, and we can never forget that. However, make no mistake, there are lots of us who are never going to be the same after this, who didn't know that people could do this to each other and now know, and you can't go back to not knowing. And then after that, after they have their lives, after they have their souls, after they have all of that, then we can talk about accountability. But I think that push, what I fear is that Netanyahu will be put on trial, executed, let's say, in some fantasy, and then people will move on. And that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen because Netanyahu did not do this. Gallant did not do this. These individuals did not do this. It was a system of colonialism and a system fundamentally of white supremacy that makes it possible to mobilize the entire world around Ukraine, appropriately so, I think. I went to Ukraine. I worked there in hospitals during the war. And simultaneously, less than a year later, is not able to look at Palestinian lives in the same way, or even to say the word genocide. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you. This is a good therapy session for me, Peter.
It's not such good therapy for us, I'm afraid. But Grafton, one last question, please, before we get on to the what we can do kind of discussion.
Well, okay, a smaller question. A couple of people were wondering what happened to the doctors and medical personnel that were arrested. Are they released? Are they still in custody? What's happened to them?
There are 40 people who are under arrest right now. The most prominent are the head of Shifa, and I would probably say like one or two of the emergency doctors as well. These are the most prominent, but there are 40 of them that kind of span from like people who, one man who's like the smilingest human being you've ever met, who I don't think has ever heard a fly and definitely knows nothing about Hamas, all the way to a medical resident who's in his training and has just been trying to like serve people as much as he can. So there is the possibility of putting pressure on the Israelis to have them released, and we need to do that. The problem is that the Israelis need these men to say something, and that's probably why they're torturing them. Torture is perfectly acceptable within the Israeli military system, and forced confessions are not a problem. You can go to jail for a very long time based on a forced confession. And we see, again, Israel is not creative. They're not inventing anything new. They went after, I forget the name of the organization, but they went after the head of this one organization, international organization. If somebody remembers it, just put it in the chat here. And the head in Gaza, they arrested him, and then they tried him, and they tried him on such ludicrous charges. They said that he had embezzled $12 million to Hamas. And so the Australian government and the other governments involved with this particular organization.
This was the World Vision, I think.
Yeah. Yes, World Vision. Yeah. Thank you so much. They went and they looked at the budget, and the budget of the entire organization wasn't 12 million. They were like, listen, there's no way this guy could have diverted 12 million. We don't have 12 million to divert. Like, it's not, and the organization isn't so big that we wouldn't notice 12 million. That's more than our annual budget. So it didn't matter. He got I think, sentenced to 12 years or something like this. And I believe he's either serving or has served like a good chunk of it so far. So there's nothing new here. These men might end up in jail for a very, very long time, unfortunately.
Eric, first of all, I apologize to others. One of our problems is that Tarek has very rich answers to questions, and so we probably didn't get to cover all the questions we wanted to, but your answers have been very complete and very emotional for us, for all of us to hear that, and very authentic sounding, so we appreciate that. Tarek, just a few minutes left now. We're getting near the end of our time and your time. You've been generous with us. About what you think we as Canadians can do. Do you think we should take ketchup bottles and squirt it on our MPs? What apart from the obvious things like attending demonstrations? I saw a note that there's going to be a demonstration in London apparently this Sunday. Is that someone? I saw that in the chat. There are demonstrations. You're writing to your member of parliament. What do you think we should be doing? What can we do?
Okay, so firstly, for the lawyers in the room, is there such a charge as incitement to ketchup? Anyway, obviously, we should issue broad condemnations to our MPs for all of their actions. Look, I think to answer that question properly, you really have to build off of whether or not we have power. Because if we have power as people, then there's an action to be taken. And if we don't have power as people, then what does it matter what we do? The next question is whether our elected representatives have power. And then the third part of that is whether the country has power. And to be honest, I don't know the answers to any of these questions, but I have a pretty good idea what they are. In terms of our own power, maybe we have power, maybe we don't. But if we don't have power, then why do people spend so much time, money, and energy convincing us that we shouldn't do anything and trying to demobilize us? To me, it strikes me that if I truly had no power, people wouldn't care if I showed up to a protest or didn't show up to a protest. These organizations wouldn't be bothered, or the governments or whatever. Israel spends billions of dollars on people like me who are asking for human rights. That's it. They literally have a faction of their government fully devoted to combating boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is probably the single most impactful sort of way to think of what we can do to alter the trajectory of the Israeli state. So I think the answer is that yes, we have a tremendous amount of power, but not only that, also that the biggest lie told to us is that we don't have that power. And it's very easy because we all naturally fall into a funk. If you believe you don't have power, you excuse yourself from action. Oh, what can I do? I don't have any power anyway. There's nothing I can do anyway. Can't tell you how many times I've heard that. It's bullshit, and you can't be excused just because you say it. Now, do our politicians have power? That's, I guess, the next question. My MP, is very emblematic. I don't think he's special at all. This guy is nobody, truly. And his name is Peter Fragiskatos. And Fragiskatos goes on TV. He was very upset about the ketchup thing, like literally cried. It's wild. And he goes on TV and he says, what am I supposed to do? I have no power. Canada's a middle power, and what we do doesn't matter at all. Okay. So what did Fragiskatos do when the Iranians were oppressing women? He made statements. He showed up at a protest. What about when Ukraine happened? He insisted on weaponry. London makes weapons, and they're going to Ukraine. He insisted on money. Canada has money, and it is going to Ukraine. And he insisted on broad condemnations, on acts of solidarity, on raising flags. He raised the Ukrainian flag over his own office. So does Peter Fragiskatos believe that Canada has no power? No, he doesn't, or else he wouldn't have done all of those things. Does Fragiskatos want to blow smoke up our ass so that he doesn't have to say anything about Palestinians? Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what he tried to do, and that's why he was called out forcefully. And then, of course, again, the weaponization of safety. We call him in the movement Fragile Pete, or Pete Fragile Katos, because all of a sudden he's out there crying about his personal safety. Like, dude, it was ketchup. Get over yourself, bro. Like, nobody's showing up to kill you the same way as they're showing up to kill every Palestinian in the fucking country. But again, Fragile Pete has picked up that scent of weaponizing safety against the people who want safety. We are the people who want safety for him and for everybody else. So we have power. Our politicians have power. And if our government truly believed that it didn't have power, why is it fighting so hard? Why is it doing such deeply unpopular things to support this genocide? The vast majority of Canadians oppose this genocide, and the vast majority of Canadians want their government to make that known. And yet they don't. So the Canadian government is willing to spend a tremendous amount of capital. This government will lose this election based on Palestine. Palestine is the reason why they will lose, because once you see a fake fascist and a real fascist, you think to yourself, well, at least the real fascist is honest. Like, what do I care? I'm not going to go vote for Trudeau. I'm not going to make a strategic vote. I think the Liberals should pay the price. I think NDP should pay the price for what they're doing. So that brings us into three main actions that we can do. First action, we have to punish our politicians for this bullshit. I don't usually work on that particular premise. I usually work with politicians I believe in to lift them up. But in this case, these guys have advocated genocide. They need to lose their seats. Any MP who has not signed for a ceasefire by today must lose their seat, even if they sign tomorrow. It's unacceptable. The government has to go, and the NDP also has to suffer, not just for what they did nationally, but also for what they did in Ontario. I'm guessing most people here are from Ontario. In Ontario, we had an MPP, a woman of color with a disability, literally in a wheelchair. And she had the temerity to ask for a ceasefire from the jump, from day one, day two. And she was censured. She's not allowed to speak in Parliament, in provincial Parliament. And not only that, but she's also been kicked out of her party. And then the parties, and of course, it's not just that. It's that my own MPPs, people who I love, people who I respect, people who I've been working with for decades, said nothing. And your MPP said nothing too. I know that because not a single MPP said anything about this. And those who eventually said something, sure, they can probably be counted on a couple of fingers. So the first level, the foundation of all of our actions is that we have power and what we do matters. The first level of action is then on our governmental officials, local, provincial, national, all of them. All of them who didn't support a ceasefire have to pay for what they've done. And I think we have to start creating a new generation of politicians, because once you sink those politicians, then most people are going to resign. So for example, an incumbent, Trudeau, isn't going to lose this election and then be like, hey, let's try again next time. I'll be in opposition this time. He's going to resign and there's going to be a new leader. And similarly, the same thing will happen with many incumbents who lose their seats, especially if they know that they've lost it, because we're never going to forgive them. And then in that process of bringing in new people, that's where we have a lot of control, a lot of say, a lot of power. Essentially the power to primary, in the US, the term is primary. For us, it's nomination parties and things like that. But we can nominate people who we believe in. The next level is non-governmental. We have to participate in non-governmental action because our governments are impotent right now based on all these factors that I've talked about. For me, that means trying to support NGOs like the same ones that we'd been talking about earlier, Islamic Relief Canada, IDRF, of course, OFIP, CJPME on the advocacy side. And then in terms of the international ones, it would be PCRF and MAP.
Independent Jewish Voices as well.
Yes, Independent Jewish Voices is another excellent group, of course. That's on the advocacy side. And then for those NGOs, we have to basically either support them materially with money, support them politically, create space for them to do what they need to do so that they don't get attacked when the conservatives take government, that they don't lose their charitable status, etc. And then also support them in person. Can you go to Gaza? Because guess what? Gaza needs you right now. Before, a year ago, if people were to ask me like, oh, should I go to Gaza? And they had a skill that wasn't necessarily needed, I'd say, okay, well, let's think about it. Let's see if we can find a project, etc. for you. Right now, the entire society is destroyed. It's been razed to the ground. They're going to need everything. Do you have an expertise in a particular thing? Like, start thinking about how you can go to Gaza. And I think the more of us who go there, the harder it'll be for Israel and anybody else to close that channel afterwards, because we're going to have a relatively short window through which we all have to go. And then once we get there, as it closes in on us, we're able to resist that and keep it open. If you can't go yourself, then support somebody who can go. For example, I go to Gaza, but that means that my colleagues work shifts for me. My colleagues accept to do trades with me. Sometimes they support me even in financial ways. that's all important. You can do that. You can be the one doing that support. And if you can't do that, well, talk. Everybody here is able to talk to family, talk to friends. Right now, we have a really special moment. The Israelis aren't always this stupid. Right now, they're particularly stupid. They're so driven by their own internal ideologies that they're saying things like, we want to kill every Palestinian. Like, they're saying crazy things. And because they're saying crazy things, we're able to expose some of the like actual work that Israel is doing, even at times when it's not saying crazy things. Guess what? Like, Gallant is not about to become less genocidal once this war is over, but he will be in power. And Smotrich only going to go up. Like, Ben-Gvir probably going to be prime minister someday. These people are going to go up. And when they go up, it's these moments that we're able to talk to our friends and family and colleagues and people like that. Because the more popular mobilization there is, the harder it'll be to shut down the freedom and justice for Palestinians. And then if you're not able to do that, not everybody feels comfortable speaking, then the next step back, as it were, is to educate yourself and be able to at least know what's right and what's wrong, because it can change your decisions, it can change your actions in subtle ways. And then I think really that's sort of like, as we say in Islam, the adaf al-iman, like that's the weakest of practices, is to kind of just know in yourself that things are wrong. Okay, so I think that more or less has covered it. Like, in terms of the local level, the NGO level, in terms of the governmental level, we just gotta rock these guys with protests. They are feeling the pain. Like, I don't know if you saw the comparison of the Palestine protests in Ottawa and the Israeli protests in Ottawa. Embarrassing. And it was just so wonderful to be with so many people who supported Palestinian rights and to be reminded of how together we are. And, oh yeah, you better believe the government took note. They might lie to us and tell us that we were only a few hundred. Literally, I saw that in a news article. We all know. There's 100,000 people there. We all know. And the government knows. And so we keep the pressure up on them. It makes it very hard for them to operate the way that they want to.
Tarek Loubani, Dr. Tarek Loubani, thank you so much for spending now an hour and a half with us. As I've said before, I will include the links in the follow-up email. I also, I'm not nearly as well informed or as articulate as Dr. Loubani, but I do have a number of speaking engagements. I've been invited to various groups to talk, and I'll be talking over the next month or so, and I'm looking forward to having invitations from anybody else. I'll talk to any group, large or small, trying to help people understand the Israel-Palestine issue to the best of my ability. My organization, OFIP, is a not-for-profit organization. We're all volunteers. We do have some costs involved in having our Zoom calls and websites and MailChimp and so on and so forth. So we do gratefully accept donations. And I also said that we would be making a contribution to Dr. Loubani after this is over. So on behalf of all of us, it's been a very educational and very emotional presentation, emotional for you, I'm sure, and certainly for me and for all the people listening. So Tarek, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for sharing your view and your passion and your determination with us. It's an inspiration to all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. And Peter, I don't need to tell you, but maybe I'll tell the crowd just how deep my appreciation is for the work that you do. It's tireless work and it's thankless work, and it means that people like me can just show up. So thank you so much for facilitating this and making it possible.
I'll just refute that. It's not thankless work. I get thanked so many times. Palestinians keep thanking me, and I say I love it. So thank you for thanking me, and thanks to all of you for attending tonight. Have a good evening, everybody.